"That's not Indiana limestone," she said, tapping a polished crimson nail on the edge of the pool coping. "That's a violation." The words, delivered with the flat finality of a judge's gavel, hung in the warm May air. Carol Miller, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, did not look at Mark Henderson as she spoke. Her gaze remained fixed on the pale gray stone, her expression a mask of practiced disappointment. Behind her, two other members of the Architectural Control Committee, a nervous-looking man named Arthur Finch and a woman who mirrored Carol's stern demeanor, shifted their weight on the manicured turf of Mark's backyard. Mark felt a familiar, cold pressure behind his ribs. He had spent 18 months navigating the HOA's labyrinthine approval process. As an architect, he respected rules, understood the value of aesthetic cohesion. He had submitted detailed blueprints, material samples, and a dozen revised schematics. The final plans for his pool, the very plans Carol held on a clipboard pressed tightly to her chest, had been approved and stamped 3 months prior. The construction had been a clean, professional affair. The result was, in his admittedly biased opinion, a masterpiece of understated design. "Carol, the approved plans specify a light-colored natural stone," Mark said, keeping his voice level. "This is Pennsylvania bluestone. It's a high-quality, natural material that fits the description perfectly." Carol finally lifted her eyes. They were small, sharp, and held no warmth. Section 8.4.2 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions is quite clear. Mr. Henderson, it states that all hardscaping materials must be in keeping with the established architectural harmony of the community. The ACC has determined that Indiana limestone is the community standard. With all due respect, the CC&Rs don't mention Indiana limestone by name, Mark countered, the architect in him unable to let the imprecision stand. "It's a subjective interpretation. Arthur, you were on the committee that approved this. You saw the bluestone sample." Arthur Finch flinched, his gaze darting from Mark to Carol, and then to the neatly trimmed hedges bordering the property. "Well, the sample looked a bit lighter in the photo. Mark, you have to admit." It was a weak, terrified defense. Mark understood. Arthur was a retired accountant who had joined the board to feel useful. Carol was a force of nature who used the board to feel powerful. The outcome of any such collision was preordained. "The decision stands," Carol announced, making a sharp, definitive note on her form. "This constitutes an unapproved material substitution." She took a step back, her eyes scanning the entire yard as if searching for further infractions. The pool, its water a placid sheet of turquoise, was the centerpiece. It wasn't just a luxury for Mark, it was a necessity. After his father's stroke 6 months ago, the doctors had been unequivocal consistent. Low-impact aquatic therapy was the best hope for regaining mobility. This pool was for his dad. Carol's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "You will be receiving official notice from the management company. You'll have 14 days to cure the violation." "Cure it?" Mark asked, the absurdity of the statement making his voice waver for the first time. "You want me to rip out thousands of dollars of hand-laid stone coping?" "The rules are the rules," Carol said, turning to leave. She paused at the gate, her parting shot delivered over her shoulder. "It's a shame. It would have been a lovely pool." As he watched them retreat across his lawn, a patch of common area he was legally required to maintain at his own expense, Mark felt a surge of something more potent than frustration. It was a cold, clarifying anger. He knew this wasn't about stone. He remembered, with a sudden, unwelcome clarity, a contentious meeting in a corporate boardroom 2 years ago. He had been a finalist for a small but prestigious commercial design contract. The other finalist was a landscaping and construction firm owned by a man named Greg Miller, Carol's husband. Mark had won the contract. He hadn't given it a second thought until now. He walked to the edge of the pool, the one his father had yet to even see, and ran his hand over the smooth, cool blue stone. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Back in the quiet sanctuary of his home office, surrounded by the clean lines of his drafting table and the orderly logic of his blueprints, Mark tried to regain his composure. He pulled up the digital files for the pool project, his eyes scanning the page that bore the official ACC approval stamp. There it was, in crisp black ink, materials light-colored natural stone. Per sample submitted. He had the original sample box in his garage. He had a paper trail. This was a simple, albeit malicious, misunderstanding that could be cleared up with facts. He picked up the phone and called the one person who could temper his anger with strategy. His sister, Sarah, answered on the second ring. "Let me guess," she said, her voice a soothing blend of familial warmth and professional steel. "The Oak Haven Welcoming Committee paid you a visit." Mark sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Worse. "The ACC. Carol Miller just declared my pool coping a violation of the CCNRs." He explained the situation, the approved plans, the bluestone versus the phantom limestone standard. Sarah, a corporate lawyer who had seen every flavor of contractual dispute, listened patiently. "Okay, first, breathe," she said. "Second, do not engage with her directly, not in person, not on the phone. From this moment on, every single communication is in writing and goes through the property management company. We need a verifiable record." "I have the approved plans. Sarah, it's right here in black and white." "I know. And you're an architect, so you believe that documents and logic will win the day. I'm a lawyer, so I know that people will ignore both when it suits them. You said you outbid her husband a couple of years back. It was a minor project. I can't imagine she'd hold a grudge this long over that." "Mark, some people build their entire identities on grudges. They're load-bearing emotions," Sarah said dryly. "This isn't about the stone. This is about power. She's making a public example of you. So, we play the game. We play it by the book. Her book. And we beat her with it. Don't get emotional. Get evidence." He spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a polite, meticulously detailed email to Premier Management, the company that handled the HOA's day-to-day operations. He attached the scanned approval page, a photo of the material sample, and a link to the manufacturer's website. He cited the relevant sections of the CCNRs and respectfully requested the committee review their decision. He ended by expressing his eagerness to resolve the matter amicably. He felt a sense of relief as he hit send. The system, he believed, was designed to correct such errors. The next day, he called his father. "How's the physical therapy going, Dad?" "It's going," his father, Richard, answered, his voice still slightly slurred from the stroke, but full of his old, stubborn spirit. "They've got me lifting a 1-pound dumbbell. I feel like Mr. Universe." Mark chuckled. "Well, the real gym is almost ready. The water's in. The filter's running. It's crystal clear. I'll drive down and get you next weekend." "I can't wait, son." Just the thought of floating, of feeling weightless again. Richard's voice trailed off, thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "This means the world to me. Mark, you know that." "I know, Dad," Mark said, his own throat tightening. "It'll be worth it." The promise hung in the air after he hung up. It wasn't just about his property rights anymore. It was about his father's health, his father's hope. He looked out the window at the shimmering blue water, and felt a renewed sense of determination. He would not let Carol Miller take this away. The email arrived a week later. It was not a personal reply, but a formal, digitized letterhead from Premier Management. It was the inciting incident, the official declaration of war disguised as a courtesy. Subject: Courtesy Notice. Violation of CCNR. GOR 8.4.2. Dear Mr. Henderson, this letter serves as a courtesy notice regarding a violation of the Oakhaven Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions CCNRs observed at your property located at 128 Blossom Lane on May 15th. The violation pertains to CCNR GOR 8.4.2 Architectural Harmony. Specifically, the installation of unapproved hardscaping material for the pool coping. As per the Architectural Control Committee's ACC review, the material used is not in keeping with the established community aesthetic. Furthermore, the installation constitutes an encroachment on a designated view corridor easement. The words view corridor easement leaped off the page. Mark's blood ran cold. That was new. That was not something Carol had mentioned during the walkthrough. He pulled out the thick binder containing all his property documents and the complete CCNRs. He flipped to Section 8.4.2. It was a vague, catch-all clause about maintaining a harmonious appearance. It said nothing about specific materials. He then unrolled his property survey, a document he had studied countless times. His property backed onto a wooded common area. There was no designated view corridor. There couldn't be. A view of what a handful of oak trees. This wasn't just a misinterpretation anymore. It was a fabrication. The email continued. You are required to cure this violation within 14 days from the date of this notice. Curing the violation requires the removal of the non-compliant material and replacement with an ACC-approved material. Failure to comply will result in a formal notice of violation, which will include the levying of fines as outlined in the association's bylaws. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, the Oakhaven Estates Board of Directors. The polite closing felt like a slap in the face. This was the system he had trusted, and the system was telling him to tear his pool apart based on a lie. He forwarded the email to Sarah with a one-line message. It's escalated. Her reply came within minutes. Okay. They invented a view corridor. That's a specific, factual claim we can disprove. They're getting sloppy. Now you respond. Don't argue. Just ask for clarification. Quote the letter back to them. In reference to the designated view corridor easement mentioned in your notice, could you please direct me to the specific section of the CCNRs or the official plat map where this easement is documented? Keep it professional. Make them put their lies in writing. Mark typed out the email, his fingers striking the keys with a controlled fury. He was a man of blueprints and schematics, of precise measurements and clear rules. Carol Miller and her board had entered his world, and they were trying to win by scribbling all over his designs with a crayon. He hit send. The email, a digital arrow aimed at the heart of their flimsy justification. He was no longer trying to resolve a misunderstanding. He was gathering ammunition. The first obstacle was not a wall, but a void. His request for clarification was met with a week of profound silence. He sent a follow-up email. Nothing. He called the Premier Management office and spoke to a junior account manager who sounded all of 22. She promised to escalate his query to the portfolio manager and assured him someone would be in touch. No one was. He was being stonewalled, left to dangle in a bureaucratic limbo, while the 14-day clock on his courtesy notice ticked down. He documented every attempted contact in a spreadsheet: date, time, method, person spoken to. Sarah had drilled it into him. Create a record of their unresponsiveness. It shows you're acting in good faith, and they are not. On the 15th day, the silence was broken. A crisp, white envelope arrived, not in his mailbox, but delivered by a certified mail carrier who required his signature. Inside was the formal notice of violation. The language was colder, sharper. It restated the violation of FER 8.4.2 and the mythical view corridor. It informed him that a fine of $100 had been levied against his account. Please be advised, the letter read, that this fine will double for every 30-day period. The violation remains uncured. Unpaid fines and associated legal fees may result in the placement of a lien on your property. The word lien was a physical blow. This was the true power of an HOA. They couldn't arrest him. They couldn't evict him, but they could cloud the title to his home, effectively holding his single greatest asset hostage over a few dozen feet of stone. He immediately called Sarah. "They fined me, and they're threatening a lien." "Good," she said, her calm a stark contrast to his rising panic. "Now we have a formal action to appeal. This is procedural. Mark, it's the next step. The law in this state and the HOA's own bylaws guarantees you the right to a hearing before the board. You are going to formally request one. Again, certified mail. State that you dispute the violation and the fine. And you are exercising your right to be heard." He followed her instructions to the letter, driving to the post office to send his request for a hearing. The green certified mail slip a small, tangible piece of evidence in his growing file. He was fighting on their turf now, using their arcane rules against them. But Carol was fighting on a different front. She was targeting his reputation. The whispers started subtly. A neighbor, watering his petunias, suddenly found his shoes fascinating when Mark waved hello. Another, who he usually chatted with while getting the mail, gave a curt nod and hurried inside. The source of the chill became clear when he spoke to a friendly acquaintance 2 streets over. "Hey, Mark," the neighbor, Dave, said, leaning against his recycling bin. "Everything okay? I heard you're having some trouble with the board." "You could say that," Mark replied. "Carol Miller has decided she doesn't like my pool coping." Dave's expression soured. "Yeah, that's Carol. But she's telling people a different story. She was talking to a group of us at the community mailbox yesterday. Said you built the pool without final approval, and that you're refusing to cooperate. She made it sound like you were a rogue homeowner, thumbing your nose at the rules everyone else has to follow." He lowered his voice. "She also started ticketing people on our street for leaving their garbage cans out an hour too long, when someone complained. She told them she wouldn't have to be so strict if certain residents weren't setting such a bad example. She's trying to turn the neighborhood against you." The strategy was as insidious as it was effective. She wasn't just a bureaucratic bully. She was a political operator. She was isolating him, painting him as the source of the community's friction, the reason for her own heavy-handed enforcement. He was no longer just fighting for his pool. He was fighting for his good name in the place he called home. The pressure was mounting, a slow, methodical constriction designed to make him surrender, but with every turn of the screw, his resolve hardened. She had underestimated him. She thought he was just another homeowner she could intimidate. She had forgotten he was an architect. He built things to last. The notice for his hearing arrived a week later. It was scheduled for the next monthly board meeting, in a small, soulless conference room at the premier management office complex. He had 2 weeks to prepare. Sarah's advice was blunt. They're going to treat this as a formality, a box to check, so they can say they gave you due process before they keep fining you. You can't win at the hearing. Mark, you have to win before you even walk in the door. You need irrefutable, third-party evidence that their claim is false. That view corridor is their weak point. It's a fabrication, and fabricated claims leave a person vulnerable. How do I prove a negative? He asked. How do I prove an easement doesn't exist? You don't. You get the official document that shows what does exist. You need the official, recorded plat map for your subdivision, not the pretty, simplified one in the HOA binder, the real one, from the county recorder's office. It will show every property line, every utility easement, every right-of-way, all legally defined and recorded. She paused. And you're not the one who's going to get it. You need an expert. That's how Mark found himself sitting in the cluttered workshop of Alistair Gable, a retired county surveyor who lived on the older, non-HOA side of town. Mr. Gable was a legend among local real estate attorneys. He was a curmudgeon of the highest order, a man who spoke in grunts and communicated primarily through the rustling of old, brittle documents. Mark laid out his story, presenting his property survey and the violation notice. Mr. Gable listened, his cloudy blue eyes scanning the papers, his face betraying no emotion. He wore a faded flannel shirt despite the heat, and the air in his shop smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and dust. When Mark finished, Gable let out a derisive snort. View corridor easement. That's a new one. In 20 years surveying this county, I've seen my share of nonsense from these homeowner associations. They invent terms, misinterpret plats. They act like their little covenant book is scripture, forgetting it's subordinate to county and state law every time. He shuffled over to a massive flat file cabinet and, after a moment of rummaging, pulled out a large, rolled-up sheet of linen paper. He spread it across a vast wooden table, weighting the corners with lead-shot pouches. It was the official plat map for the Oakhaven Estates subdivision. There you are, Gable said, his gnarled finger tracing the lines. Lot 47, 128, Blossom Lane. His finger moved around the perimeter of Mark's property. Utility easement here. For the electric company, drainage easement back here. Nothing else. No view corridor. No scenic easement. No such animal exists on your lot. It's a fiction. A wave of triumph washed over Mark. This is it. This is the proof. It's a start, Gable grumbled. Not one for celebration. But you're asking the wrong question. You're asking, how do I prove I'm right? The better question is, why are they lying? He squinted at Mark. This board president, Carol Miller. You said her husband's in construction. Landscaping and hardscaping. Miller Landscaping and Design. Mark confirmed. Gable nodded slowly. There's your answer. An HOA can't typically force you to use a specific contractor, but they can create a violation and then helpfully suggest a preferred vendor who knows how to fix it to their exacting standards. It's a racket. He tapped a finger on the table. You want to find the why. You need to look at their books, their meeting minutes. Specifically, you want to see who they're paying for what. Those are public records for any homeowner. Go to the county recorder's office online portal. Sometimes the management companies only post the approved minutes on the community website, the official filings with the county. Sometimes they're more complete. It was a long shot, but Mark had nothing to lose. That evening, he navigated the clunky, outdated website of the county recorder's office. He found the repository for HOA documents and began downloading the board meeting minutes for Oakhaven Estates. Going back a year, the files were identical to the ones on the HOA portal until he got to the minutes from 6 months ago. The version from the HOA website had a large, conspicuous black box in the middle of page 3, labeled simply, Redacted, Pending Vendor Negotiation. The version he downloaded from the county recorder's office had no such box. His heart began to pound, a heavy, rhythmic thud against his ribs. He read the unredacted section, his eyes widening with each word. New business remediation of architectural violations. President Miller opens a discussion regarding a standardized process for correcting non-compliant hardscaping features. A proposal from Miller Landscaping and Design is reviewed. The proposal outlines an exclusive, high-cost contract to serve as the association's preferred vendor for the remediation of architectural violations, ensuring all work meets community standards. The proposal includes a 5% administrative fee payable to the association for each completed project, to be used for common area enhancements. Board Member Finch raises a concern about the appearance of a conflict of interest. President Miller dismisses the concern, stating that Mr. Miller's firm is the only one that has demonstrated a true understanding of the community's aesthetic. The matter is tabled for a future vote. There it was, the motive, laid bare in the dry, bureaucratic language of meeting minutes. It wasn't just a personal grudge. It was a calculated financial scheme. Carol was manufacturing violations so she could funnel lucrative, high-margin repair contracts to her husband's company. The view corridor was a pretext, a tool to create a problem only one company was positioned to solve. The 5% kickback to the HOA was the cynical flourish that would let her claim it was all for the community's benefit. Mark leaned back in his chair, a cold, hard certainty settling in his gut. He now had the what, the how, and the why. He had the official plat map proving their core claim was a lie. And he had the unredacted meeting minutes exposing their motive. He wasn't just going to a hearing to defend himself. He was going to dismantle them. Armed with his evidence, Mark felt a surge of confidence. He sent a package to the Premier Management Office via courier, addressed to the Board of Directors, to be delivered 2 days before his hearing. It contained a certified copy of the county plat map and a polite but firm letter detailing how it disproved the existence of the alleged view corridor easement. He deliberately held back the unredacted minutes. That was his trump card, the one he would play when it mattered most. The day of the hearing arrived. The conference room was small and suffocatingly beige. The 5 board members sat at a long table, Carol at its head, a portrait of unimpeachable authority. The property manager sat silently in a corner, taking notes. Mark took the single chair opposite them. "Mr. Henderson," Carol began, her voice smooth and professional. "We are here to discuss the violation at your property. You were sent materials ahead of this hearing. Do you have anything to add?" "I do," Mark said, his voice steady. He laid his copy of the plat map on the table. "As you can see from the official county plat map, no view corridor easement exists on my property. Therefore, the central basis for the violation is factually incorrect." Carol glanced at the map without truly looking at it. "The board has received your submission. However, the Architectural Committee also relies on historical community planning documents that are not always reflected on county maps. We have determined that an informal view corridor has been long established by community precedent." It was a breathtakingly audacious lie, inventing a legal doctrine on the spot. Mark saw Arthur Finch shift uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. The other board members, Carol's loyalists, nodded gravely. "An informal corridor," Mark pressed. "Could you provide those historical documents? Because without a legally recorded easement, any such claim is unenforceable." "The board's decision is based on a holistic interpretation of the CC&Rs," Carol said. "The words, a perfect, meaningless wall of jargon. We have reviewed your submission, and we find no reason to overturn the violation notice." It was a kangaroo court. His evidence had been dismissed without consideration. The outcome had been decided before he even walked in the room. He had been naive to think facts would sway them in private. "The fine stands," Carol concluded, "and will continue to accrue. This hearing is adjourned." As the other board members began to gather their papers, a defeated Mark stood to leave. But then Arthur Finch intercepted him near the door, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Mark, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I had to vote with her. I had no choice." "What are you talking about, Arthur? You know this is wrong." Arthur's eyes darted toward Carol, who was watching them from across the room with a predatory stillness. "Before the meeting, she cornered me," he said, his words a rushed torrent of fear. "She brought up the vote on the playground resurfacing contract from last year. I made a procedural mistake. I seconded the motion before it was properly introduced. It was a minor error. No harm done. But she said, if I didn't vote with her today, she would make a motion at the next public meeting to have me censured for gross negligence and removed from the board. She said she'd ruin my reputation. My wife. She's so proud of me for doing this. I couldn't." The pieces clicked into place. This was how Carol maintained her iron grip, not just with charisma and bullying, but with blackmail. She collected the small mistakes of others and kept them as weapons. Mark looked from Arthur's terrified face to Carol's smug smile. He now understood the final, crucial element of the battle ahead. It wasn't enough to expose her. He had to do it in a way that wouldn't destroy a decent, if cowardly, man in the process. The secondary moral dilemma was now clear. His victory had to be precise. A surgical strike that removed the cancer without killing the patient. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "It's okay, Arthur," he said quietly. "I understand. Don't worry." He walked out of the sterile conference room, the defeat stinging, but temporary. He had lost the hearing, but he had gained a new understanding of the battlefield. The real fight wouldn't be in a closed room with 5 people. It would be in a public forum, in front of the entire community. And he knew exactly where and when that would be the HOA annual meeting. In 3 weeks. The Oakhaven Estates annual meeting was held in the multi-purpose room of the local elementary school, a cavernous space that smelled faintly of floor wax and chalk dust. Nearly 100 homeowners sat in rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs, fanning themselves with copies of the night's agenda. On a stage at the front, the board of directors sat at a long, fabric-draped table, looking down on their constituents. A large projector screen loomed behind them. Mark had followed the proper procedure, submitting a request to be added to the homeowner forum segment of the agenda. He was allotted 3 minutes. 3 minutes to make his case, present his evidence, and unravel Carol Miller's reign. As the meeting droned on through tedious financial reports and committee updates, Mark sat calmly in the 3rd row, a simple leather portfolio on his lap. He had rehearsed his presentation endlessly, timing it to the second. Sarah sat beside him, a reassuring presence. Just the facts. She had told him. No emotion. Let the documents do the talking. Finally, Carol, acting as master of ceremonies, looked at her notes. Next on the agenda is the homeowner forum. We have one speaker tonight, Mr. Mark Henderson. Her voice was laced with a patronizing sweetness. As a reminder, speakers are limited to 3 minutes to ensure the meeting proceeds on schedule. The timer will be displayed on the screen. An enormous digital countdown timer appeared on the projector screen, Yo300. Mark walked to the lectern at the side of the stage. He placed his portfolio on the slanted surface and looked out at the faces of his neighbors, some curious, some bored, some openly hostile. He could feel Carol's eyes on him, confident she had already won. "Good evening," Mark began, his voice clear and amplified by the microphone. "My name is Mark Henderson, and I live at 128 Blossom Lane. I am here tonight to discuss a matter of due process and fiscal responsibility." He clicked a small remote in his hand. The first image appeared on the screen, a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the violation notice he had received, with CC&R, WAR 8.4.2, and the phrase "View Corridor Easement" highlighted in red. On the right was the text of FERBR 8.4.2 itself, a bland statement about architectural harmony. "The board has been fining me for an alleged violation of Section 8.4.2, citing an unapproved material and an encroachment on a view corridor," Mark said, his tone that of a professor delivering a lecture. As you can see, the text of the cited rule says nothing about specific materials, only harmony. More importantly, the board's entire case rests on the existence of this so-called view corridor. He clicked the remote again. The screen changed to show the official, high-resolution county plat map, with his property outlined in blue. 0215 remained on the timer. "This is the legally recorded plat map for our community, obtained from the county recorder's office. It documents every legal easement on my property. As you can see, there are utility and drainage easements. There is no view corridor. It does not exist. The core justification for this violation, and the fines I am being charged, is a fiction." A low murmur rippled through the audience. People were sitting up straighter, looking from the screen to the board members at the table. Carol's pleasant smile had frozen into a rigid mask. "This naturally led me to ask a question," Mark continued, his pacing perfect. "Why? Why would the board invent a violation? I found the answer in the public record." He clicked again. The screen now showed two documents side by side. On the left was the redacted version of the meeting minutes from the HOA website, with its ominous black box. On the right was the unredacted version from the county recorder's office. He had highlighted the key section in yellow. The timer showed year 110. "These are the board meeting minutes from 6 months ago. The version on our community website has been redacted. The full version, filed with the county, reveals a discussion about a proposal from a company called Miller Landscaping and Design to be the exclusive, high-cost contractor for remediating architectural violations." The murmur in the crowd grew louder, sharper. A few people gasped. Mark saw Carol's husband, Greg Miller, shrink down in his seat in the front row. "Miller Landscaping and Design," Mark said, letting the name hang in the air for a moment, "is owned by Greg Miller, the husband of our board president, Carol Miller." The room erupted. Shouts of "what" and conflict of interest echoed off the cinderblock walls. Carol began banging a small gavel on the table, but the noise drowned her out. Mark glanced at the timer, 0025. He still had one more thing to do. He had to protect Arthur. He held up a hand for quiet. And surprisingly, the room subsided. Waiting for his conclusion, he looked directly at Arthur, then back at the crowd. "Now, to be clear," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "the unredacted minutes show this proposal was discussed, but the vote was never properly tabled by the board president, which is why it doesn't appear in the official, approved record. It was a procedural failure." He had done it. He had framed the issue as Carol's procedural failure to properly run a meeting, deflecting any attention from how individual members may have voted or acted. He had exposed the scheme while giving Arthur complete cover. Arthur looked at him, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound gratitude. Mark turned his gaze back to Carol. Her face was ashen. "This isn't about stone coping," he said, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power. "It's about a pattern of fabricating violations to create a revenue stream for a family business, funded by our homeowner dues and fines. This is a betrayal of the board's fiduciary duty to this community." He looked up at the screen. The timer flashed, Ratio 1, then Yeji. My time is up, he said simply, and walked back to his seat. The room exploded into chaos. The carefully managed decorum of the annual meeting shattered into 100 angry questions. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting at the stage. "Is this true?" Carol, someone yelled from the back. "Why were the minutes redacted?" another demanded. Carol hammered the gavel, her face a blotchy, furious red. "This is out of order. Mr. Henderson's claims are baseless and slanderous. This is a private matter." "It's not a private matter when you're using our money," a woman shouted, shaking her agenda at the stage. The property manager, a woman named Jennifer, who had been silently taking notes, suddenly stood up and walked to the microphone. The panicked look on her face was unmistakable. She was in damage control mode, desperate to distance her company from the impending legal implosion. "Premier Management acts solely at the direction of the Board of Directors," she said, her voice tight with corporate panic. "We were not aware of any unredacted versions of the minutes. We strongly advise the board to address these serious allegations with full transparency." She had just thrown Carol and the board under the bus. From the middle of the crowd, Dave, Mark's neighbor, stood up. "I make a motion from the floor," he called out. "I move for a vote of no confidence in President Miller and the current board. And I move that we freeze all non-essential spending and immediately commission an independent financial audit of the last 2 years of the association's records." Another homeowner immediately seconded the motion. The room roared its approval. Carol, utterly defeated, slumped in her chair as the motion was carried by an overwhelming voice vote. Her power, built on whispers, intimidation, and procedural games, had evaporated in 3 minutes under the bright, unforgiving light of public evidence. Mark sat quietly beside Sarah. She gave his arm a squeeze. "You did it," she whispered. "You didn't just win. You gave the community its voice back." He looked around at his neighbors, no longer bored or hostile, but energized, united, taking back control of their community. The victory felt bigger than his pool. It was shared. In the weeks that followed, the old guard of the Oakhaven Estates HOA crumbled. A special election was held, and Carol Miller and her 2 loyalist board members were recalled by an overwhelming margin. The independent audit revealed a dozen other instances of questionable contracts and selective enforcement. Premier Management, in an effort to save its reputation, terminated its contract with the association. Mark, now hailed as a local hero, was approached by a delegation of his neighbors. They asked him to lead a temporary oversight committee to help select a new, more transparent management company and rewrite some of the association's more ambiguous bylaws. He reluctantly agreed, feeling a sense of duty to see the restoration through. Arthur Finch, who had survived the recall, was his first and most enthusiastic supporter on the new committee. 3 months after his timed speech, Mark stood before the community again at a special town hall. The atmosphere was completely different, no longer tense and adversarial, but collaborative and hopeful. He stood not at a lectern, but in the center of the room, speaking not as an accuser, but as a fellow homeowner. He had one final surprise. It wasn't punitive, it was restorative. "Our association has been through a difficult time," he began, "and it's tempting to simply focus on punishing past mistakes. But I believe the best way forward is to rebuild trust and redefine what this community stands for." He outlined his committee's proposal, a new, crystal-clear architectural review process with published material standards and an objective, points-based approval system designed by him to eliminate ambiguity. But then, he went further. The audit revealed that our reserve funds are healthier than we thought, partly because so many past expenditures were unnecessary. My final proposal is this: instead of spending the first year's budget surplus on cosmetic upgrades, like new signs or flowers for the entrance, we establish a Helping Hands Fund. This fund will provide small grants to elderly or financially struggling residents to help them comply with essential safety-related maintenance rules, fixing a broken fence, repairing a cracked sidewalk, trimming a dangerous tree limb. Instead of using our rules to punish people, let's use our resources to help them. Let's be a community that lifts its members up, instead of fining them down. The proposal was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of heartfelt applause. It was passed unanimously. A conflict born from personal greed and a kickback scheme had been transformed into an act of genuine community support. That weekend, Mark's father finally got to use the pool. Mark helped him down the gentle steps into the warm, clear water. He watched as his dad, for the first time in months, let go of the handrail and floated, a look of pure, weightless relief on his face. The sun glinted off the pale gray bluestone coping, the very stone that had started it all. It looked beautiful. It looked like a victory,